The villagers warned Eleanor Vale not to enter Ravenshire Manor. They said the old earl had died there alone. They said no servant had crossed its doors since his funeral. But with snow freezing in her hair and nowhere else to go, Eleanor ignored them. She expected darkness, dust, and perhaps a roof for the night. Instead, she found fresh firewood stacked beside the hearth, a bedroom prepared as though someone had been expecting her, and a sealed document on the desk. Across the top were 3 words: for Eleanor Vale. Only 6 hours earlier, Eleanor had still possessed a home. It had never truly felt like hers, not since her father remarried, but she had known every stair that creaked beneath a careless foot and every window that rattled when winter winds swept across the fields. Then her father died. 3 weeks after the funeral, her stepmother decided Eleanor no longer belonged there. "You are 23 years old," Beatrice Vale said, as she stood in the entrance hall, dressed in black silk she had ordered before Eleanor's father was even buried. "I have supported you long enough." Eleanor stared at the small leather case sitting beside the front door. Everything she had been permitted to keep was inside it: 2 dresses, a pair of stockings, her mother's silver hairbrush, and 17 shillings. "My father left this house to us both," Eleanor said. Beatrice's expression barely changed. "Your father left debts." "That is not what Mr. Pembroke told me." For the first time, something sharpened in her stepmother's eyes. It vanished, almost immediately. "You have always had an unfortunate habit of listening where you are not invited." Beatrice stepped forward and placed Eleanor's wool coat into her arms. "Go!" Eleanor looked toward the windows. Snow was falling so heavily that the hedges at the edge of the property had nearly disappeared. "It will be dark within the hour. Then I suggest you walk quickly." "Where am I supposed to go?" Beatrice opened the front door. A blade of winter air rushed into the hall. "That is no longer my concern." Eleanor did not beg. Perhaps that was what Beatrice expected. Instead, she pulled on her coat, lifted her case, and stepped outside. The door closed behind her. Then came the unmistakable sound of the lock turning. For several seconds, Eleanor stood motionless on the stone steps. 23 years of her life lay behind that door: her father's library, her mother's old piano, the little window seat where she had spent childhood afternoons reading while rain tapped against the glass. All of it had disappeared with the turn of a key. So Eleanor began walking. At first, she intended to reach the village of Ashcombe before nightfall. There was an inn beside the church, though 17 shillings would not last long. But the storm worsened. Within an hour, the road had vanished beneath the snow. Within 2, Eleanor could barely feel her fingers. She had just begun to wonder whether she would survive the night when she saw the iron gates. They stood half open between 2 stone pillars, almost hidden beneath dead ivy. Above them, carved into weathered stone, was a raven with its wings spread wide. Eleanor knew the crest. Everyone in Ashcombe did. Ravenshire Manor. The estate had belonged to Alistair Blackwood, Earl of Ravenshire, a wealthy recluse who had died 3 winters earlier. Children dared one another to touch its gates after sunset. Adults simply avoided the road. Eleanor looked toward the village. Nothing but white darkness. Then she looked beyond the gates. Far among the trees stood the outline of an enormous house. One night, she told herself, only until the storm passed. She pushed through the gates. The path to the manor had nearly disappeared, yet something about the snow troubled her. There were tracks, not old ones. Fresh footprints led toward the house. Eleanor stopped. Someone had been here recently. She should have turned back. Instead, cold and exhaustion drove her onward. Ravenshire Manor rose from the storm like something forgotten by time. 3 stories of dark stone, narrow windows, twisted ivy, and tall chimneys disappearing into the white sky. The front door was unlocked. That frightened Eleanor more than if it had been chained shut. "Hello?" Her voice disappeared into the enormous entrance hall. No answer came. She stepped inside. Dust covered the marble floor. White sheets draped the furniture. Portraits watched her from the walls. Yet when Eleanor entered the drawing room, she froze. Beside the fireplace was a stack of freshly cut wood. Not damp, not rotten, fresh. She touched one piece. Dry. Someone had prepared it. A box of matches sat on the mantel. Her hands shaking, Eleanor built a fire. Warmth slowly returned to her fingers. She might have remained there all night if she had not noticed the faint strip of light beneath a door across the hall. Eleanor approached it cautiously. The room beyond was a study. A single oil lamp burned on the desk. Beside it sat a sealed envelope. Her name was written across the front, Miss Eleanor Vale. Her breath caught. She had never been inside Ravenshire Manor. She had never met the Earl of Ravenshire. And yet someone here knew she was coming. Eleanor broke the seal. Inside was a folded legal document. She opened it beneath the trembling lamplight. Halfway down the first page, she found the name of the deceased Earl. At the bottom of the second, she found her own. Eleanor read the sentence once, then again, and a third time, because the words made no sense. I hereby name Eleanor Margaret Vale as the principal beneficiary of Ravenshire Manor and all lands belonging to the Ravenshire estate. Eleanor slowly lowered the paper. Outside, the storm battered the windows. Behind her, somewhere deep inside the supposedly abandoned house, a floorboard creaked. Eleanor turned toward the sound. The floorboard creaked again, not from the corridor, from the darkness beyond the study door. She folded the will quickly and pressed it against her chest. Who is there? Silence. The oil lamp hissed softly beside her. Then came 3 slow footsteps. A figure appeared at the far end of the corridor. Eleanor reached instinctively for the brass poker leaning beside the fireplace. Stop. The man did. He was elderly, perhaps 70, dressed in a dark wool coat, with snow still clinging to the shoulders. His silver hair was neatly combed despite the storm, and he carried a lantern in one hand. He looked less like an intruder than a man returning home. More unsettling still, he did not seem surprised to see her. Miss Vale? Eleanor tightened her grip on the poker. How do you know my name? The old man glanced at the document in her other hand. I see you found his lordship's instructions. Who are you? Thomas Harrow. He stepped closer to the light. I served Lord Ravenshire for 38 years. Eleanor stared at him. The Earl has been dead for 3 years. Yes. And everyone in Ashcombe says this house has been empty since his funeral. Thomas gave a faint, humorless smile. Villagers say many things about houses they are too frightened to enter. Eleanor lowered the poker only slightly. Were you the one who lit the lamp? Yes. The firewood? Yes. The bedroom? Yes. Her unease deepened. You knew I was coming. Thomas was quiet for a moment. I knew you might. Eleanor placed the poker back beside the hearth. That makes no sense. It will. He removed his gloves and laid them carefully on the desk. Lord Ravenshire left very precise instructions. Every winter, beginning on the 3rd anniversary of his death, I was to prepare this room, light that lamp before nightfall, and ensure the west bedroom was ready. For me? For Eleanor Margaret Vale. The name sounded different when spoken by someone who had apparently been waiting years to say it. Eleanor looked down at the will again. There must be another Eleanor Vale. There is not. You cannot know that. I knew your mother. The room seemed suddenly too still. Eleanor raised her eyes. What did you say? Thomas studied her face. For the first time, the old servant's composure faltered. You have her eyes. My mother died when I was 6. I know. Eleanor took one step toward him. How? Thomas did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked to a tall cabinet beside the bookshelves and removed a small iron key from his waistcoat pocket. Behind 2 leather-bound volumes was a hidden keyhole. He inserted the key. A narrow compartment opened within the wall. Inside lay a wooden box. Thomas carried it to the desk. The lid bore the same raven crest, carved above the estate gates. What is that? Something Lord Ravenshire ordered me never to open. Then why show it to me? Because the order was not meant for me. He turned the box. A brass plate had been fixed to its front. Eleanor leaned closer. Her initials were engraved into the metal. E.M.V. Thomas. Placed another key beside the box. The Earl said that if you ever entered Ravenshire Manor willingly, the choice had finally become yours. The choice to do what? To learn why your mother spent the last years of her life trying to keep you away from this place. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. My mother never mentioned Ravenshire. She made certain of that. Thomas looked toward the dark windows. Lord Ravenshire believed silence would protect you. Your mother believed distance would. Protect me from whom? Thomas's jaw tightened. Before we speak of that, you need to understand something about the will. Eleanor lifted the document. It says I inherit the estate. It says considerably more than that. He turned to the final pages. Eleanor had stopped reading after seeing her name. Thomas pointed to a paragraph near the bottom. She read it slowly. Her inheritance included Ravenshire Manor, nearly 2,000 acres, several tenant farms, a collection of investments held in trust, and an account at Bartholomew and Finch Bank in London. Eleanor swallowed. How much? Thomas met her eyes. Enough that no one could reasonably describe you as dependent upon your stepmother ever again. For a fleeting instant, Eleanor imagined Beatrice's face. Then another line caught her attention. Her relief vanished. The inheritance carried a condition. Eleanor must take legal possession of Ravenshire Manor before midnight on the final day of January. She looked toward the calendar on the desk. January 30th. Tomorrow. Why such a condition? Because, Thomas said quietly, if you fail to claim the estate, everything passes to the next named beneficiary. Eleanor searched the page. The name was written clearly beneath hers. Her blood turned cold. Mrs. Beatrice Vale. My stepmother? Thomas nodded. Eleanor stared at him. She threw me out tonight. I suspected she might. You knew? I knew that 3 days ago someone entered the solicitor's office in London and attempted to obtain a copy of this will. Beatrice? We cannot prove it. Eleanor looked again at the document. A horrible possibility began forming. She did not throw me out because she wanted me gone. Thomas said nothing. She needed me gone. Perhaps. Why? Thomas's gaze shifted toward the wooden box. Because if Lord Ravenshire was telling the truth, your stepmother has spent 17 years making certain you never discovered who your mother really was. Before Eleanor could speak, the sound of metal echoed through the entrance hall. Both of them froze. The front door. Someone was trying the handle. Thomas extinguished the lamp. Darkness swallowed the study. Then a voice called from the other side of the manor door. A woman's voice. Eleanor? Eleanor stopped breathing. She knew that voice. Beatrice had followed her. Eleanor? Beatrice's voice came again through the front door. Soft, almost concerned. That frightened Eleanor more than anger would have. Thomas moved silently toward the study entrance and placed one finger against his lips. Another knock echoed through the manor. Eleanor, darling, I know you are inside. Darling. Beatrice had not called her that in 17 years. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the will. How did she know I came here? She whispered. Thomas's expression hardened. That is exactly what concerns me. Beatrice knocked again. I made a terrible mistake. Please open the door. Eleanor almost laughed. 6 hours ago, the woman had watched her walk into a blizzard without enough money to survive a week. Now she had followed her across miles of snow to apologize? No. She wanted something. Eleanor stepped toward the corridor. Thomas caught her wrist. Do not let her see the document. Why? Because if she knows you have read it, tomorrow becomes much more dangerous. Eleanor looked at him. What happens tomorrow? You claim the estate. How? The Earl's solicitor is due here at noon. Thomas lowered his voice. Once you sign the declaration of possession in his presence, Ravenshire becomes legally yours. And if I do not? At midnight, your right expires. The knocking stopped. For several seconds the manor was silent. Then Beatrice spoke again. I know what you found, Eleanor. Thomas and Eleanor exchanged a glance. I know about the will. Eleanor felt the last trace of doubt disappear. Beatrice had known. Perhaps she had always known. Eleanor moved toward the entrance hall before Thomas could stop her. She did not open the door. Instead, she stood behind it. You told me father left debts. A pause. He did. You told me I had nothing. I was trying to protect you. Eleanor stared at the carved oak door. By throwing me into the snow? Beatrice sighed. Even through thick wood, Eleanor recognized that carefully measured sound. The sigh she used whenever she wished to make cruelty seem like patience. There are matters you do not understand. Then explain them. Another silence. Finally Beatrice said, Lord Ravenshire was not a good man. Thomas's face changed. Not surprise. Anger. You never knew him, Eleanor replied. I knew enough. How? Beatrice did not answer. Eleanor looked toward Thomas. The old servant shook his head slowly. Do not open the door, Beatrice continued. If you have found the document, burn it. Eleanor almost thought she had misheard. What? Burn the will. Why would I do that? Because that estate is poisoned. You expect me to believe you crossed the countryside in a snowstorm to save me from inheriting a manor? I expect you to remember who raised you. My father raised me. The answer came sharper than Eleanor intended. And you spent 17 years making certain I never asked questions about my mother. Outside, something shifted. Beatrice's voice hardened. Your mother made choices that destroyed everyone around her. Thomas stepped closer to the door. His face had gone pale. Eleanor noticed. What choices? Open the door. No. Eleanor. No. For the first time, Beatrice abandoned the gentle tone. Open this door now. Eleanor felt something inside her settle. Hours earlier, that voice would have made her obey. Not anymore. No. Silence. Then Beatrice said something so quietly, Eleanor nearly missed it. If you stay in that house until noon tomorrow, you will regret it for the rest of your life. Footsteps moved away from the entrance. Eleanor waited. A carriage door slammed somewhere beyond the gates. Wheels crunched over snow. Only when the sound disappeared did Thomas relight the lamp. Eleanor turned on him. You knew she would come. I thought she might. You knew she knew about the will. I suspected it. Stop giving me half answers. Thomas closed his eyes briefly. You are right. Eleanor placed the will on the desk. Who was my mother? Thomas looked at the wooden box bearing Eleanor's initials. Her name was Margaret Vale when you knew her. I know that. No. Thomas met her eyes. That was the name she used after she left Ravenshire. The words landed slowly. Eleanor stared at him. What was her name before? Thomas reached into his coat and removed a small silver key. He placed it in Eleanor's palm. Open the box. Her hands trembled as she fitted the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. Inside lay a bundle of letters, tied with faded blue ribbon. A miniature portrait and a birth certificate. Eleanor picked up the portrait first. The woman painted there was unmistakable. Her mother, much younger, perhaps 19. She stood on the front steps of Ravenshire Manor, beside a dark-haired man Eleanor recognized from the portraits downstairs. Alistair Blackwood, the dead earl. Eleanor turned over the miniature. 2 names had been written on the back. Alistair Blackwood and Lady Margaret Blackwood. Eleanor stopped breathing. Lady Margaret? Thomas nodded. Your mother was Lord Ravenshire's younger sister. Eleanor looked toward the will, then toward the enormous manor surrounding her. The revelation seemed impossible. If he was my uncle, he was. Then why did no one tell me? Thomas's gaze fell to the letters. Because 17 years ago, your mother discovered that someone inside this family was stealing from the estate. Who? She never proved it. Eleanor looked toward the door through which Beatrice had disappeared into the storm. But she suspected someone. Yes. Who? Thomas hesitated. Then he took the birth certificate from the box and unfolded it. Before you ask that question, you should look at the name written where your father's should be. Eleanor frowned. My father was Charles Vale. Thomas said nothing. She lowered her eyes to the certificate. Her mother's name appeared first. Margaret Blackwood. Below it was Eleanor's date of birth, and beside the line marked father, there was a name she had never seen before. Eleanor read it once, then again. Charles Vale was not written there. Instead, the document named a man whose portrait hung in the great hall of Ravenshire Manor, a man who had supposedly died 2 months before Eleanor was born. The name on the birth certificate was Jonathan Ashford. Eleanor knew it, not because anyone had ever spoken of him, because his portrait hung at the far end of Ravenshire Manor's great hall. She had passed it less than an hour earlier. A handsome young man in military uniform stood beneath an oak tree, one hand resting on the head of a black hunting dog. A brass plaque beneath the frame read, Captain Jonathan Ashford, 1852 to 1875. Eleanor had been born in March of 1876. According to the plaque, Jonathan Ashford had died nearly 2 months before her birth. She looked at Thomas. Who was he? Thomas pulled out the chair opposite her. Sit down. I would rather you answer me. He was Lord Ravenshire's closest friend. My mother's lover? Thomas flinched slightly at the word. He was the man she intended to marry. Eleanor stared at the certificate. Then why didn't she? Because Jonathan Ashford died before the wedding. How? A riding accident. Thomas's answer came too quickly. Eleanor noticed. You do not believe that. No. Did my mother? No. The storm pressed against the manor windows. Thomas opened one of the letters from the wooden box. The official story was that Captain Ashford's horse threw him near Blackthorn Bridge. His body was found in the river the following morning. And what was the unofficial story? Thomas handed her the letter. It was written in her mother's handwriting. Eleanor recognized the curved M immediately. She began to read. Jonathan had been frightened. He had discovered irregularities in the Ravenshire accounts. Large sums had disappeared from tenant rents, investment dividends, and land sales. Someone had forged Lord Ravenshire's signature. Jonathan intended to take the evidence to London. He died the night before he was supposed to leave. Eleanor lowered the letter. Someone killed him. That was your mother's belief. Who had access to the accounts? Very few people. Thomas began counting quietly. Lord Ravenshire, his solicitor, the estate steward. He paused. And Charles Vale. Eleanor's head snapped up. My father? The man you believed was your father. Thomas corrected himself carefully. Charles served as Lord Ravenshire's financial secretary. Eleanor felt the room tilt beneath her. Why would my mother marry him if she believed Jonathan had been murdered? She did not marry him immediately. Thomas took another letter from the box. After Jonathan's death, your mother discovered she was carrying you, unmarried, pregnant, and surrounded by people she no longer trusted. So Charles helped her. At first, Thomas's expression darkened. He offered his name. He promised to take her away from Ravenshire and raise the child as his own. Eleanor looked down at the certificate. And my uncle allowed it? Lord Ravenshire begged her not to go. Why did she? Because she had become convinced the person responsible for Jonathan's death was still inside this house. Eleanor slowly looked toward the dark corridor. Thomas continued. Margaret left Ravenshire before you were born. Charles married her quietly in Scotland. He gave you his surname, and for 6 years they lived far from this estate. Until she died. Yes. Eleanor had only fragments of that winter. Her mother coughing, curtains drawn against gray skies, Charles carrying bowls of hot water upstairs. Then one morning, a closed bedroom door. She had always been told pneumonia took Margaret. And after my mother died? Thomas hesitated. Charles returned to this part of England. Why? I never knew. He must have known I was Lord Ravenshire's niece. He did. And he never told me. No. Eleanor stood. Anger rose through the confusion. My mother lied to me. My father lied to me. My uncle knew where I was and did nothing. Lord Ravenshire did more than you realize. Thomas crossed to the bookshelves. He wrote to you every year. Eleanor stared at him. I never received a single letter. I know. Thomas removed a ledger. Neither did he receive your replies. I never wrote any. Exactly. He opened the ledger. Each year contained an entry. Letter sent to Miss Eleanor Vale. Beside each entry was the same notation several months later. No response. 17 years. 17 letters. Eleanor touched the page. Someone intercepted them. That was Lord Ravenshire's conclusion. Charles? We believed so. My father is dead now. Yes. Then why did the letters never reach me after his death? Thomas looked at her. Because someone else was living in your house. Beatrice. Eleanor stepped away from the desk. Her stepmother had married Charles when Eleanor was 14. For 9 years, Beatrice had controlled the household correspondence, had opened bills, received invitations, dismissed servants, managed every detail after Charles became ill. How long did Beatrice know? I cannot tell you. But she knew enough to know about the will. Yes. Eleanor looked toward the window. Somewhere beyond the storm, Beatrice was planning her next move. Then Eleanor remembered something. When she threw me out, I told her Mr. Pembroke said father had not left us penniless. Thomas went still. Pembroke? Yes, Arthur Pembroke. Father's solicitor. Thomas crossed the room so quickly his chair nearly overturned. Are you certain that was his name? Of course. Thomas stared at her. What? He reached for the old account letter written by Margaret. There were 4 people with access to Ravenshire's finances. You named them. Yes. Thomas placed his finger over one line. Lord Ravenshire, the estate steward, Charles Vale, and the solicitor. The name written beside that final position was Edwin Pembroke. Eleanor's stomach tightened. Arthur's father? Thomas nodded. And Edwin Pembroke was the last person known to have met Jonathan Ashford alive. Before Eleanor could answer, a sharp crack echoed from somewhere downstairs, glass breaking. Thomas extinguished the lamp again. This time, neither of them believed it was the storm. Someone had entered Ravenshire Manor. Thomas reached for the fireplace poker. Eleanor caught his sleeve. You said no one else was supposed to be here. No one is. Another sound came from below, a slow scrape, then silence. Thomas moved toward the corridor. Stay here. No. Miss Vale, if someone came for that will, I am not sitting alone in a dark room waiting for them. For a moment, Thomas looked as though he might argue. Then he handed her the poker. Keep behind me. They descended the main staircase without a lamp. Moonlight filtered weakly through the tall windows, turning the marble floor silver. Halfway down, Eleanor saw the broken glass. A narrow pane beside the west entrance had been smashed inward. Snow had blown across the floor. Footprints led away from it. Large, a man's boots. Thomas crouched. Fresh. They followed the tracks into the west corridor. At the end stood a door Eleanor had not noticed earlier. It was open. Thomas stopped. That room was locked. What is it? The old records office. They entered. Drawers had been pulled from cabinets. Ledgers lay scattered across the floor. Someone had searched the room quickly, desperately. Eleanor noticed an empty space on one shelf. Dust covered everything around it except a clean rectangular mark. Something was taken. Thomas looked, his face drained of color. The Ravenshire account book. The one showing the missing money? The original ledger from the year Captain Ashford died. A crash sounded behind them. Thomas spun around. A dark figure rushed past the doorway. "Stop!" Thomas ran after him. Eleanor followed. The intruder reached the entrance hall, slipped on melted snow, recovered, and shoved open the broken side door. For one instant, moonlight caught his face. Eleanor recognized him. "Mr. Pembroke?" The man froze. Arthur Pembroke stared back at her. Her father's solicitor, the same man who had quietly told Eleanor, after Charles Vale's funeral, that certain financial matters did not make sense. The same man whose warning had angered Beatrice. "Eleanor," he said. Thomas blocked the doorway. "Put down whatever you took." Arthur held a leather ledger beneath his coat. "This is not what it looks like. It looks like burglary," Thomas said. Arthur glanced toward the snow outside, then back at Eleanor. "You need to leave this house. I have heard that several times tonight. I mean it. Did Beatrice send you?" His expression changed. That was answer enough. Eleanor tightened her grip on the poker. "You knew about the will." "Yes." "For how long?" 2 days. "And you told her?" "No." Eleanor faltered. Arthur looked genuinely afraid. She already knew. Thomas stepped closer. "How?" "I do not know." "You expect us to believe that?" Arthur pulled the ledger from beneath his coat. "I came because my father left instructions." Thomas stopped. "Edwin Pembroke?" "Yes." Arthur looked toward Eleanor. "My father died 8 years ago. Last week, while clearing an old strongbox, I found a sealed letter addressed to me. It said I was to open it only if Eleanor Vale ever returned to Ravenshire." Eleanor stared at him. "What did it say?" "That my father had helped conceal a crime." Thomas's face hardened. "What crime?" Arthur swallowed. "The theft from the estate. And Jonathan Ashford." Arthur looked away. "My father believed his death was connected." Believed? He knew more than he admitted. Arthur held out the ledger. "That is why I came for this. Not to destroy it. To compare it with the records my father kept." Eleanor did not lower the poker. "Then why break in?" "Because someone has been following me since yesterday." "Who?" "I do not know." Thomas gave a cold laugh. "Convenient." Arthur stepped into the moonlight. There was blood along the side of his forehead. Only then did Eleanor see the tear in his coat. "You are hurt. Someone tried to stop my carriage near Blackthorn Bridge." Eleanor remembered the name, the place Jonathan Ashford had supposedly died. Arthur continued. "My driver ran. I walked the rest of the way." He opened the ledger. Several pages near the middle had been marked with slips of paper. "Look." Eleanor approached cautiously. Arthur pointed to a sequence of payments, large withdrawals, each authorized by a different signature. Lord Ravenshire, Charles Vale, Edwin Pembroke. Then Eleanor noticed something strange. Every withdrawal had been transferred to the same account. The recipient was listed only by initials. B.V. Eleanor stared at the page. "Beatrice Vale?" Arthur shook his head. "These entries were made in 1875. Beatrice would have been a child." "Exactly." Thomas took the book. "Then who was B.V.?" Arthur reached into his coat and removed his father's letter. "The full name is written here." Eleanor unfolded it. A single sentence had been underlined twice. "The payments were made to Benedict Vane, estate steward of Ravenshire." Eleanor frowned. "I have never heard that name." Thomas had. The old servant looked as if he had seen a ghost. "Thomas?" He did not answer. "Who was Benedict Vane?" Thomas slowly sat down. "He disappeared the week after Jonathan Ashford died." Arthur nodded. "My father believed he fled with the stolen money." "Then what does he have to do with Beatrice?" Thomas raised his eyes to Eleanor. "Benedict Vane had one daughter." Eleanor felt the room become cold again. "What was her name?" Thomas answered quietly. "Beatrice." For several seconds, Eleanor could hear nothing but the wind moving through the broken window. "Beatrice is Benedict Vane's daughter?" Thomas nodded. "She was born Beatrice Vane." Eleanor looked at Arthur. You knew? No. Arthur seemed as stunned as she was. My father never mentioned a daughter. Thomas rose slowly. Benedict kept her away from Ravenshire. She lived with relatives in York for most of her childhood, and later she became Beatrice Vale. Eleanor said the name with disgust. She married Charles. Yes. By coincidence? Thomas did not answer. Eleanor understood anyway. No. She began pacing. She sought him out. That is what Lord Ravenshire eventually suspected. Why? Because Charles knew where Margaret had gone. He knew who you were. And after your mother died, he was the only person standing between Benedict Vane's family and the child who could one day inherit Ravenshire. Eleanor stopped. The child was me. Yes. Arthur opened his father's letter again. There is more. He turned to the final page. My father wrote that Benedict Vane did not steal alone. Thomas looked sharply at him. Who helped him? He does not say. He must. He says only that the second person remained close to Margaret after she left Ravenshire. Eleanor felt a terrible suspicion forming. Charles. Arthur did not answer. Thomas looked away. Eleanor saw it. You already suspected him. I suspected many things. Tell me the truth. Thomas's shoulders seemed to age beneath his coat. After Jonathan died, Charles helped examine the estate accounts. He was the one who first accused Benedict Vane. That sounds like innocence. It did. But your mother discovered that several forged documents had been written on paper purchased through Charles's office. Eleanor stared at him. She believed both men were involved? She never knew. And then she married Charles. She was pregnant, terrified, and desperate to escape Ravenshire. Thomas's voice softened. Sometimes people choose the person who offers them a door without realizing where that door leads. Eleanor thought of Charles Vale, the father who had taught her to ride, who had sat beside her bed when she was ill, who had never once treated her as anything but his daughter. Could all of that have been built upon a lie? There must be another explanation. There may be. Thomas nodded toward the wooden box upstairs. That is why Lord Ravenshire preserved the letters. Arthur closed the ledger. And why someone wants those records destroyed. A sound came from outside. Not footsteps. Hooves. All three turned toward the shattered window. A carriage was approaching Ravenshire. Eleanor's heart tightened. Beatrice? Thomas crossed to the curtain and looked out. No. The carriage stopped before the main entrance. 2 lamps burned at its front. A man climbed down wearing a heavy black overcoat and carrying a leather case. Thomas exhaled. Mr. Hollis. Who? Lord Ravenshire's solicitor. Eleanor looked toward the grandfather clock. It was not yet dawn. He was supposed to come at noon. He was. Thomas opened the door. The solicitor entered covered in snow. He was thin, gray-haired, and breathing heavily. Miss Vale? Eleanor stepped forward. Yes. Mr. Hollis looked relieved. Thank God. He shut the door quickly behind him. You must sign the declaration now. Thomas frowned. The instructions specify noon. They did. Hollis placed his case on the table. But the situation has changed. Arthur moved closer. What happened? The solicitor opened the case and removed a stack of papers. 3 hours ago, someone filed a petition in county court claiming Eleanor Margaret Vale is dead. Silence filled the hall. Eleanor stared at him. Dead? Yes. And who filed it? Hollis hesitated. Mrs. Beatrice Vale. Eleanor's face went cold. On what grounds? She submitted a witness statement claiming you disappeared during tonight's storm and were seen falling through the ice near Miller's Crossing. That is absurd. I am standing here. Which is precisely why we must act before the court opens. Hollis pushed a document toward her. If Beatrice convinces a magistrate you died before taking possession, the estate passes to her under the secondary clause. Eleanor looked at the signature line. Then she noticed something. A second sheet lay beneath it. Across the top were words that made Thomas step forward sharply. Petition for immediate transfer of Ravenshire estate. Already signed. Beatrice Vale. Arthur swore under his breath. She prepared this before throwing Eleanor out. Eleanor understood. The storm, the locked door, the false witness. Her stepmother had never intended merely to make her homeless. She had intended to erase her. Hollis held out a pen. Sign, Miss Vale. Eleanor reached for it. Then every light in Ravenshire Manor went out. From somewhere beyond the entrance hall came the smell of smoke. Smoke. Thomas said the word first. Then Eleanor smelled it too. Not the faint scent of extinguished lamps. Wood. Burning wood. Arthur rushed toward the west corridor. A dull orange glow flickered beneath the door at the far end. The records room. Thomas moved after him. No. Eleanor caught his arm. The ledger. Arthur was already running. If the fire reaches those papers, everything is gone. He disappeared into the corridor. Thomas turned to Hollis. Get Miss Vale outside. No. Eleanor seized the declaration from the table. I am not leaving. Miss Vale, if I walk out now, whoever started that fire wins. The flames spread quickly. Dry curtains ignited. Smoke rolled across the ceiling. Hollis coughed into his sleeve. The document must be witnessed. Then witness it. Eleanor bent over the entrance table. Now. The solicitor stared at her. The terms require possession of the estate. I am standing inside Ravenshire Manor. Yes, but... Then give me the pen. A crash shook the corridor. Arthur stumbled back through the smoke, clutching the old account ledger. Behind him, flames burst through the records room doorway. Move! Thomas grabbed a rug from beneath a side table and tried to beat down the spreading fire. It was useless. The wood paneling had already caught. Eleanor pressed the pen to the declaration, then stopped. Someone stood beyond the front windows. A dark figure outside in the snow, watching. For 1 second, Eleanor could make out a woman's face in the orange reflection of the fire. Beatrice. She had come back. Their eyes met through the glass. Beatrice did not look frightened. She looked disappointed. Then she turned and disappeared into the storm. She did this. Eleanor dropped the pen. Arthur followed her gaze. Beatrice? She is outside. Thomas abandoned the burning corridor. Then we leave. Now. The ceiling groaned. Hollis snatched up his legal case. Miss Vale, the declaration. Eleanor looked at the fire, then at the unsigned page. Beatrice had chosen the one weapon that could destroy both the manor and the evidence inside it. But she had made one mistake. She had assumed Eleanor would still behave like the frightened girl she had thrown into the snow. Eleanor signed, Eleanor Margaret Vale. Hollis immediately added his name beneath hers. Arthur signed as second witness. Thomas stared. Is that enough? Hollis folded the document and placed it inside his coat. It establishes her claim, but it must reach the county registry. When? Before midnight. Arthur looked toward the burning hallway. And if you do not, Beatrice's petition may still be considered first. The front door suddenly opened. Wind swept snow across the floor. Everyone turned. A man stood in the doorway. Broad-shouldered, covered in a dark traveling coat. His face was unfamiliar to Eleanor, but Thomas recognized him immediately. The old servant went rigid. You. The stranger stepped inside. A pistol hung at his side. Get out of the house. Thomas moved between Eleanor and the man. You were told never to return. Things have changed. Who is he? Eleanor demanded. The stranger looked at her. His expression shifted when he saw her face. For an instant, grief replaced urgency. You look exactly like Margaret. Eleanor's heart lurched. You knew my mother? The man gave a bitter laugh. Knew her? He reached inside his coat. Thomas raised the poker. Do not. The stranger slowly removed a leather packet and tossed it onto the table. It opened on impact. Inside was an old military photograph. Eleanor recognized the uniform. the same uniform worn by the man in the portrait upstairs. She stared from the photograph to the stranger, older now, scarred, but unmistakably the same eyes. Her voice almost failed. "Jonathan Ashford is dead." The stranger looked at her. "No." Behind him, the flames climbed toward the second floor. "My name is Jonathan Ashford." Eleanor could not move. "And if Beatrice learns I am alive," he said, "the will be the least dangerous secret in this house." Eleanor could not look away from him. Jonathan Ashford. The man whose death had shaped every secret of her life. The man named as her father. Alive. Thomas was the first to recover. "You should have stayed away." Jonathan's expression hardened. "I stayed away for 23 years, and Lord Ravenshire died believing you were dead." "I know. You let Margaret believe it too." Jonathan flinched. "No." The fire cracked behind them. Arthur shouted from the corridor, "We do not have time for this." Jonathan turned toward the smoke. "There is a stone passage behind the library. It leads to the old chapel. The flames will not reach it." Thomas stared at him. "How do you know?" "Because I helped Alistair build the entrance when we were boys." He moved toward Eleanor. "We can argue once you are alive." Eleanor did not move. "You are my father." Jonathan stopped. No one spoke. Finally he said, "Yes." The word hit harder than any explanation could have. Eleanor's throat tightened. "Then where were you?" Jonathan looked toward the burning manor, as if searching there for the answer. "Trying not to get you killed." He led them through the drawing room, while Thomas and Arthur carried what documents they could save. Behind a bookcase was a narrow stone door. Jonathan pressed a hidden catch. The wall opened. Cold air rushed from a passage beyond. Hollis entered first. Eleanor remained behind. "You have 30 seconds, she told Jonathan. "Tell me why everyone believed you were dead." He nodded. "The night I was supposed to leave for London, I met Edwin Pembroke at Blackthorn Bridge. He brought evidence that Benedict Vane had been stealing from Ravenshire." "Beatrice's father." "Yes, but Benedict was not alone." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "No." "Charles?" "No." Eleanor froze. Jonathan continued. "Charles discovered the theft before I did. He was helping us expose it." Relief came so suddenly that Eleanor nearly lost her balance. "The man who raised me was innocent?" "In that matter, yes." "What happened at the bridge?" "Benedict was waiting." Jonathan touched the scar near his neck. "He attacked me. I went over the bridge into the river." "But you survived." "Barely." "Then why disappear?" "Because Edwin came to me 2 days later, with proof that Benedict had men watching Margaret. He told me if I returned openly, Benedict would use her, and the child she carried, to force me into silence." Eleanor's anger returned. "So you abandoned us?" Jonathan accepted the accusation without protest. "I thought it was temporary." 23 years is not temporary. "No." His voice broke for the first time. "It is cowardice, dressed as sacrifice." The honesty stopped her. Jonathan looked down. "I went abroad under another name. I sent money through Edwin. I waited for word that Benedict had been arrested. He never was. He vanished. And my mother? When I finally returned secretly, she had already married Charles." Jonathan looked at Eleanor. "She believed I was dead." "You could have told her." "I tried." He pulled a folded letter from inside his coat. The letter was returned unopened. Thomas took it. The seal had never been broken. Eleanor recognized the address, her childhood home. "Charles returned it?" Jonathan shook his head. The handwriting on the envelope was not his. He handed it to Eleanor. Across the front were 4 words. "Recipient no longer resides here." The handwriting was elegant, sharp, familiar. Eleanor had seen it on household accounts for years. Beatrice. But she had not married Charles then. "No," Jonathan said. "She was working in his household under another name." Eleanor stared at him. "What name?" Jonathan answered. "Miss Bennet." A memory surfaced. Her father once mentioned a governess who had cared for Eleanor after Margaret's death, a woman who later left. Years afterward, Charles had met Beatrice and married her, or so Eleanor had believed. She knew us before she married him. Yes, she planned all of it. I believe so. Thomas looked grim. She entered Charles's house to learn what Margaret knew. Jonathan nodded, and when Margaret died, Beatrice stayed close enough to watch Eleanor. Eleanor's stomach turned. Did she kill my mother? Jonathan's silence was worse than an answer. We do not know. A beam crashed in the drawing room. Smoke poured through the doorway. Arthur shouted from inside the passage. Now! Jonathan took Eleanor's arm. She pulled away. One more question. He stopped. Why did you come back tonight? Jonathan looked toward the window where Beatrice had stood. Because 3 days ago, I received a message written in Lord Ravenshire's hand. Thomas stared. That is impossible. He has been dead 3 years. I know. Jonathan reached into his pocket. The note contained only one sentence. If Eleanor reaches Ravenshire, Benedict Vane will come for her himself. Thomas read it twice, then whispered, Benedict is dead. Jonathan looked toward the snow outside. No. A shadow moved beyond the gates. An old man stood beside Beatrice's carriage, watching the manor burn. Jonathan's face went cold. That is Benedict Vane. Benedict Vane stood beyond the iron gates, as though he had been waiting for the house to burn. Snow gathered on the shoulders of his black coat. Beside him stood Beatrice. For the first time since Eleanor had known her, the woman looked afraid, not of the flames, of the old man beside her. That is her father? Eleanor whispered. Jonathan nodded. I saw him once in Antwerp 15 years ago. He called himself Bernard Vale. Vale? He has used many names. Thomas stared through the window. All these years. He never disappeared, Jonathan said. He simply learned how to live where no one thought to look. Another section of ceiling collapsed behind them. Arthur shouted from the passage. We have seconds! Jonathan pulled Eleanor toward the hidden doorway. But before they could enter, a gunshot cracked through the glass. The window shattered. Thomas fell backward. Thomas! Eleanor dropped beside him. Blood darkened his sleeve. I am all right, he gasped. Go! Jonathan drew his pistol and fired once toward the gates. Benedict disappeared behind the carriage. Beatrice screamed. Arthur and Hollis dragged Thomas into the passage. Eleanor followed. Jonathan closed the stone door behind them, just as flames swallowed the drawing room. The passage descended beneath the manor. Cold water ran along the floor. At its end stood a rusted iron door. Jonathan forced it open. They emerged into the ruins of a small chapel, half buried among yew trees. The storm had weakened. Ravenshire Manor burned behind them, orange flames rising against the snow. Hollis clutched the signed declaration inside his coat. We need to reach the registry. Arthur looked toward the road. Beatrice's carriage is blocking the main gate. Jonathan pointed toward the woods. There is an old tenant road north of the chapel. A voice answered from the darkness. You will not reach it. Benedict Vane stepped from behind a stone monument. His pistol was aimed directly at Eleanor. Beatrice stood several feet behind him. Her face was pale. Father, she whispered, this was not the agreement. Benedict did not look at her. You were supposed to remove the girl before she reached the manor. I did. You left her alive. I thought the storm. You thought. His contempt silenced her. Eleanor finally understood. Beatrice had spent years manipulating her household, but she had never been the architect. She had been carrying out someone else's design. You made her marry Charles, Eleanor said. Benedict smiled faintly. She required little persuasion. Beatrice looked at him. That is not true. You wanted his house, his money, his name. You promised me Ravenshire, and you failed to secure it. Eleanor stepped forward. Jonathan caught her arm. Benedict raised the pistol. "Careful!" Eleanor looked straight at him. "You killed Jonathan." "I attempted to." "You stole from my uncle. He had more money than sense." "And my mother?" For the first time, Benedict's smile disappeared. Beatrice turned toward him. "Do not." Eleanor saw it. Beatrice knew. "What happened to my mother?" Benedict shrugged. "Margaret had a weak constitution." Jonathan moved. The pistol shifted toward him. "Stay where you are." Eleanor's voice hardened. "She did not die of illness." Beatrice closed her eyes. "No." The word barely carried through the snow. Eleanor stared at her. "What did you say?" Beatrice began trembling. "My father sent me into your house when you were 6. Benedict hissed. "Beatrice." She ignored him. She ignored him. "I was supposed to find the letters Margaret had kept from Ravenshire." Eleanor could hardly breathe. "And when you found them?" "I gave them to him." Benedict stepped toward her. "Enough." Beatrice backed away. "Margaret saw me." Jonathan's face changed. "What did you do to her?" "I did nothing." Tears appeared in Beatrice's eyes. "But he did." She pointed at her father. Benedict fired. Jonathan knocked Eleanor down. The bullet struck the stone wall. Arthur lunged from the side and hit Benedict's arm. The pistol fell into the snow. Thomas, wounded but conscious, seized it. "Do not move." Benedict stared at the old servant. "You do not have the nerve." Thomas cocked the pistol. "I have waited 23 years to discover that." Benedict stopped. Beatrice sank beside the chapel wall. Hollis looked toward the horizon. A bell began ringing in Ashcombe. "Morning!" The county offices would soon open. Arthur turned to Eleanor. "We still have to deliver that declaration." Eleanor looked at Ravenshire Manor. The roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. Hours earlier, she had entered it, believing she owned nothing. Now she possessed the truth about her mother, the name of her real father, and evidence that could finally expose the crime that had haunted Ravenshire for a generation. But none of it mattered if Benedict's plan succeeded before midnight. Eleanor took the document from Hollis. "Then we go now." Behind her, Beatrice whispered her name. Eleanor turned. Her stepmother looked smaller than she ever had. "There is one more thing you need to know." Eleanor waited. Beatrice looked toward the burning manor. "Lord Ravenshire knew your mother was murdered. And he also knew who helped my father cover it up." Eleanor's stomach tightened. "Who?" Beatrice looked directly at Arthur Pembroke. "His father." Arthur Pembroke went completely still. "My father?" Beatrice gave a tired, bitter laugh. "You truly never knew." Arthur stared at her as if she had struck him. "Edwin helped your father?" "He helped everyone." Benedict's expression changed. For the first time that night, Eleanor saw uncertainty in his face. "Beatrice." She ignored him. "He helped Benedict hide the missing money. He helped Charles alter household records. He helped make Jonathan Ashford's death appear accidental." Arthur shook his head. "No. He regretted it later," Beatrice continued. "That was why he kept records, why he left you letters. He wanted forgiveness without ever having to confess while he was alive." Arthur looked down at the documents in his hands. His father's confession suddenly carried a different meaning, not the testimony of a witness, the confession of an accomplice. "Thomas kept Benedict at gunpoint. Is she telling the truth?" Benedict said nothing. Eleanor looked at Arthur. "Open the final page of your father's letter." Arthur hesitated, then unfolded it. His eyes moved slowly across the writing. Eleanor watched his face collapse. "There is another paragraph," he read aloud. "I allowed fear to make me useful to Benedict Vane. I falsified the report concerning Captain Ashford's accident and destroyed evidence Margaret Blackwood brought to me after Jonathan's disappearance." Jonathan closed his eyes. Arthur continued. "When Margaret threatened to go to the authorities, Benedict silenced her. I did nothing. That failure has followed me every day since." Silence settled over the ruined chapel. Even the storm seemed to have stopped. Eleanor thought of her mother, not the Lady Margaret Blackwood from the portrait, her mother, the woman who had brushed her hair beside the fire, who had kissed her forehead each evening, who had died while Eleanor was still young enough to believe adults always told the truth. Margaret had not been weak, she had been hunted, and for 23 years, the people responsible had depended upon silence, surviving longer than she did. Eleanor looked at Benedict. "It ends today." He smiled. "You believe a few old papers will undo me?" "No." She held up the signed declaration. "This will." His eyes narrowed. "You think Ravenshire makes you powerful?" "No." Eleanor stepped closer. "It means I no longer need permission to fight you." Benedict lunged. Thomas raised the pistol, but Beatrice moved first. She stepped between them. "Enough!" Benedict stopped inches from his daughter. "Move!" "No! You owe everything to me." Beatrice's face twisted. "I lost everything because of you. You have Ravenshire waiting for you if the girl fails." "I do not want Ravenshire." Benedict stared at her. For years, Eleanor had believed Beatrice incapable of shame. Now she saw something worse. A woman realizing too late that every cruel decision she had justified had brought her to the same place as the man she feared most. Beatrice looked at Eleanor. "I cannot undo what I did." "No. I kept your uncle's letters from you." Eleanor said nothing. "I lied about your father's estate. I knew about the inheritance. I intended to claim Ravenshire after you disappeared." Arthur looked sharply at her. "You admit that?" "Yes." "And the false petition?" "Yes." Hollis stepped closer. "You understand I am a solicitor and a witness to this confession." Beatrice almost smiled. "I am counting on it." Benedict grabbed her shoulder. "You foolish girl!" Beatrice pulled away. "No more." A sound came from the road. Hooves. Several horses. Then voices. Men from Ashcombe appeared through the trees. The manor fire had drawn half the village. At their head rode Constable Harris. Benedict looked toward the woods. Jonathan immediately blocked his escape. Thomas still held the pistol. For once, there was nowhere for Benedict Vane to disappear. Constable Harris dismounted. "What in God's name happened here?" Eleanor looked at the burning remains of Ravenshire Manor, then at the documents Arthur carried. It may take some time to explain. By 8 o'clock that morning, Benedict Vane was in custody. Beatrice went with him voluntarily. Her confession, Edwin Pembroke's letter, and the surviving account ledger gave the authorities enough to reopen Jonathan Ashford's supposed death, Margaret Blackwood's death, and the theft from the Ravenshire estate. Arthur insisted on surrendering every document his father had left behind. He expected Eleanor to hate him for Edwin's crimes. She did not. "You are not responsible for the choices your father made," she told him. Arthur looked toward the burned manor. "Neither were you." Perhaps, Eleanor thought, that was the first true thing either of them had been given in a very long time. Hollis left for the county registry before 9. Jonathan rode with him. Eleanor almost stopped her father before he left. There were too many questions, too many years between them. But Jonathan seemed to understand. He paused beside his horse. "I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not know if I can." "You should not decide today." Eleanor studied the man she had spent her entire life believing was dead. "Will you disappear again?" Jonathan shook his head. "Never." That was not forgiveness, but it was a beginning. At 11:43 that morning, Eleanor Margaret Vale was legally recorded as the owner of the Ravenshire estate. Beatrice's petition was dismissed before noon. For the first time in nearly half a century, Benedict Vane's claim over the Blackwood family was finished. Yet when Eleanor returned to Ravenshire that afternoon, there was little left of the great house. The west wing had collapsed. The roof was gone. Blackened walls rose from the snow. Thomas stood beside her with his wounded arm in a sling. I am sorry, Miss Vale. Eleanor looked at the ruins. Why? You inherited a manor and lost it the same night. No. She surprised herself with the answer. I inherited walls. Thomas looked at her. The rest survived. The tenant farms, the land, the investments, her uncle's letters, her mother's name, and somewhere beneath the burned study, perhaps dozens of secrets still waited beneath stone and ash. Eleanor walked toward the entrance. A blackened beam lay across the steps. Thomas called after her. It is not safe. I know. She climbed anyway. The entrance hall was open to the winter sky. Snow fell through the broken roof. Portraits had burned from the walls, except one. Near the staircase, scorched around its edges, remained the portrait of Alistair Blackwood, the Earl of Ravenshire, her uncle. Eleanor stood beneath it. You could have made this easier, she whispered. Thomas smiled faintly behind her. His lordship rarely made anything easy. Eleanor noticed something beneath the fallen frame. A small metal box. She pulled it free from the ash. Inside was a final envelope. The fire had blackened its edges but not destroyed it. Across the front was her name. Again, Eleanor Margaret Vale. Thomas stared. I have never seen that one. Eleanor opened it. The letter inside was short, written in Alistair's hand. My dear Eleanor, if you are reading this, then you came to Ravenshire despite everything others did to keep you away. I hope you will forgive an old man for leaving you mysteries, where I should have left you answers. This house was never meant to be your reward. It was meant to bring you home, long enough to learn that you were never the unwanted girl others convinced you that you were. Eleanor stopped reading. Her vision blurred. Thomas looked away politely. She continued, Ravenshire belongs to you, but do not allow it to own you. Restore it if you love it. Leave it in ruins if you do not. Sell every acre if freedom demands it. The inheritance is not the manor. The inheritance is choice. Your mother deserved that choice and was denied it. I pray you will not be. Your uncle, Alistair. Eleanor folded the letter carefully. For 23 years, other people had decided where she belonged. Her mother had hidden her. Charles had protected her with silence. Jonathan had protected her by disappearing. Beatrice had controlled her. Benedict had tried to erase her. Even Alistair had waited for circumstances to lead her back to Ravenshire. Now, for the first time, no one was deciding anything for her. Thomas looked at the ruins. What will you do? Eleanor gazed through the shattered wall toward the valley. Beyond the trees, tenant cottages sent thin trails of chimney smoke into the morning sky. The snow had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds and touched the blackened stones of Ravenshire. Rebuild, Thomas smiled. The manor? Eleanor shook her head. Everything. By spring, the scaffolding had risen around Ravenshire Manor. Eleanor refused to rebuild it exactly as it had been. The west wing became smaller. The dark study was replaced by a library with tall windows. The locked rooms were opened. The servants' quarters were repaired before the ballroom, and every tenant debt that Benedict Vane had illegally created was cancelled. Arthur Pembroke became Eleanor's solicitor, though he made her promise never to trust a Pembroke without reading the papers herself. Thomas returned as steward. Jonathan remained nearby, not in the manor, not yet. He rented a cottage on the edge of the estate and visited each Sunday. Some weeks Eleanor invited him inside, some weeks she did not. He never complained. Beatrice was sentenced for fraud and conspiracy, though her testimony against Benedict reduced the punishment. Eleanor never visited her, but several months later, a letter arrived. She placed it unopened in a drawer. Perhaps one day she would read it. Perhaps she would not. That choice belonged to her. 2. Benedict Vane lived long enough to see every property purchased with stolen Ravenshire money seized. The fortune he had spent decades building disappeared piece by piece. There was a certain justice in that, but Eleanor discovered that revenge interested her far less once she finally possessed the power to pursue it. On the first anniversary of the fire, snow fell again over Ravenshire. Eleanor stood at the restored entrance, as workers carried the last furniture inside. Thomas approached with a familiar wooden box. We found this beneath the old east wall. Inside were 17 envelopes, every letter Alistair Blackwood had sent her, unopened. Eleanor took the first. It was addressed to her 7th birthday. She smiled. Then she carried the letters into the library and sat beside the fire. Outside, Ravenshire Manor stood against the winter night once more, not as the tomb of a dead earl, not as the prize of a cruel family, and not as the haunted house villagers had feared for years. It was simply a home. This time, Eleanor had chosen it.